for 70 plus years, primarily for the Star Ledger, and he's still filing regular columns into his early 90s. The Ledger is where Jerry and I met more than 40 years ago when I was a news reporter. There's not a major sporting event that Jerry hasn't covered, and we don't have enough time to list all of his awards and halls of fame he belongs to. Tonight, we're going to focus on Jerry's latest nonfiction book, his 14th, entitled Larry Doby in Black and White, The Story of a Baseball Pioneer, which was released nationally just today. Hello to my good friend out there in Henderson, Nevada. How are you?
Well, it's good to see you again. It's good that we're both here. And whoever wandered in through the door, hello.
Jerry, before we take the new book, I'd just like to take a moment to revisit your last book about growing up Jewish in Newark in the 1930s and 40s. In the early days of its publication, you told me it seemed like it might be your best-selling book ever. I think our viewers might be curious. How did it do?
It was not my best-selling book ever. That book is still selling. That's a boxing book. It's sold very well in England as well as here. But the book did well, and I'm very proud of the book because I did not give myself any breaks. I was a snotty little kid, got in trouble constantly, and it's all in the book. I don't hide from that. But I'm very proud of the book because I think I captured my father. My father was the dominant one in our house, and he had been a professional baseball player, and he and I together had a love affair with baseball until he passed away. So the book did okay.
Okay. If I'm not mistaken, you had already started the Doby book when you began and finished the Newark book. Is that correct?
Well, a book I was finishing. Yeah, I did. Well, I've been writing the Doby book for 35 years, not on this computer, but Doby was my three closest friends in the world were Larry Doby, Monty Irvin, and Muhammad Ali, who you may have heard of. So we were writing that book every day of our relationship, and some way or another, when we spoke, something else came that wound up in the book.
Okay, so before we discuss the new book, I thought it would be helpful to our viewers if I were to provide a brief summary of Larry Doby's life and career.
Okay.
Larry Doby was born in Camden, South Carolina in 1923. He moved north after his father died in a boating accident and lived in Patterson, where he was a three-sport star at Patterson Eastside High School. He was signed by the Newark Eagles of the Negro Leagues right out of high school and played for the Eagles under the assumed name of Larry Walker because his mother, who had negotiated his contract, didn't want his status as an amateur athlete jeopardized since he also had an offer to go to college on a basketball scholarship. Doby was a star with the Eagles as an infielder and was paid $300 a month. He spent more than 2 years in the military during World War II, but returned to baseball and helped lead the Eagles to their only Negro Leagues title in 1946. The deciding game of the championship series against the Kansas City Monarchs was played at Rupert Stadium in Newark. Partway through the following season, Doby's contract was sold by Eagles owners Abe and Effa Manley to the Cleveland Indians for $10,000. He made his major league debut on July 5th, 1947, as the first Black player in the American League and second overall behind Jackie Robinson of the Brooklyn Dodgers. Doby started slowly with the Indians and really didn't blossom into the premier player he became until he was moved to the outfield. He played his last big league game in 1959. In between, Doby was a seven-time All-Star and World Series champion with Cleveland in 1948, a triumph that prompted the city of Patterson to throw a parade in his honor. He also played in Japan for a season at the far end of his career. Doby managed the Chicago White Sox for the last half of the 1978 season and later served as a big league coach and scout. After retiring from baseball, Doby worked for the Essex County Prosecutor's Office and the New Jersey Nets which were owned in part by Joe Taub, a close boyhood friend of his from Paterson. Doby was inducted into the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1998, and he died 5 years later at the age of 79. That was 2 years after Helene, his wife of 55 years, who'd been his schoolboy sweetheart, had passed away. The couple had 5 children and lived in Montclair for many years at the end of their lives after moving from Paterson. There are statues of Doby in Camden, South Carolina, Paterson, and outside the baseball stadium in Cleveland. The Cleveland team, now known as the Guardians, has retired his number, and Doby was additionally honored with his image on a U.S. postal stamp. So, with that as background, I read the book, and it seems to me that it's part biography, part opening the world to Larry Doby as a man and what he faced and felt when he became the second Black man to play Major League Baseball, at least to the degree he was willing to tell you. And third, part setting the record straight, particularly when it comes to how unfairly the press dealt with him, especially in Cleveland. Is my reading of this correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, the question is, you're telling me I did it right, is what you're saying. And yeah, it's correct.
So it's a biography, but it's more than a biography. It's a personal reminiscence that you had with him over a series of years where, as you say, he was a man who held, lots of things close to the vest, but maybe he opened up to you more than he had with anyone else on the outside.
Well, he did, because when the book, first of all, Larry died. He didn't know I was going to do the book. And I was talking to Monty Irvin, who had played for the Giants, about it. And they were very close friends since their amateur days, when they played on the team called the Cleveland Smart Set, and then again on the Eagles. And Monty kept pushing me. And one day I saw him at the old Bears Stadium, the failed Bears Stadium. And he said to me, "When's your book coming out?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. What can I say, Mike?" He said, "You have to do that book. 1, 2, you cannot die." I said, "What are you talking about?" He said, "You can't die because you're the last writer who saw all of us when we played in the Negro Leagues. And occasionally you write about those days now. And the young people growing up, now they can't, reading you, they can't say, oh, they never gave you a league, you never had a league, and etc." So I finished it. And I tell you, there was a lot went into that book. That mainly, I was on trial with myself. The story is so rare and so unusual, and so in the dusty back rooms of American history, where it should not be, that I kept saying, am I going to make it clear now? Am I going to explain this? Am I going to make this clear? I don't know whether I did, but I did get some good news today. The book debuted today. Every copy on Amazon sold out the first day, and the new books are on the way to Amazon. So I do feel pretty good about it. And it's an act of friendship.
Okay. So, Jerry, let's see if we can now gear our discussion along a chronological order. In reading the book, I compiled a list of those who aided Larry Doby's career and those who hampered it along the way. I'd like to throw some of those names out at you and have you talk about each one briefly,
Sure.
starting from Doby's Sandlot years, then going to the Eagles, extending to the Cleveland Indians, and finally into his retirement from baseball. Doby told you the most important coach he ever had was a man named Pat Wilson, someone I suspect few, if any of us, recognize. Who was he, and how did he factor in Larry Doby's career?
That was my question to Larry. Larry said, how many managers have I had all my life? How many managers? The only one I ever learned, the one I learned the most from was Pat Wilson. And I said, Pat who? Pat Wilson was the coach of the all-black Paterson Smart Set semi-pro team, which played past the hat games in Paterson in the summer when Larry was a high school student. And they could play. And on that team, he was a second baseman then. The shortstop was Monty Irvin. And they stayed together on the Eagles, and they stayed together in the majors. Uh, he learned a lot there, and that's who Wilson was.
Okay. Then there were Abe and Effa Manley, who gave him his professional break with the Eagles. Doby often said seeing black faces in the stands at any stadium was uplifting to him, and he even mentioned it in his Hall of Fame induction speech. You also describe how special Eagles games in Newark's Rupert Stadium were, especially with the way the fans dress. How did playing for the Eagles benefit Larry Doby?
Well, first of all, it gave him he, and Patterson at Patterson Eastside High School, he was all state football, all state basketball, all state baseball, 4 years, and ran track. And so, but that was Passaic County. When he played for the Eagles, it opened up all of New Jersey because the Eagle fans came from everywhere within the state. Like you said, Sundays, when the Newark Bears, who were voted the greatest minor league team in history, left the stadium to go on road trips, the Eagles moved in. And when I was a little kid, I will say this, the Bears games were packed with white faces. The Eagles games were packed with black faces, except one. There's one little white kid in knickerbockers or knickers or short pants. That was me, and I was the only one in the stadium. They were the community. The community loved them. There was a hotel in Newark called the Grand Hotel on West Market Street. And that was the Sugar Hill, or what Chicago called Bronzeville, of Newark. All the intellectuals went there, the poets, the doctors, the writers, the lawyers, and the Newark Eagles stayed there during the season. And they were so much a part of the community that young ladies looking to maybe make a relationship would sit in the dining room and look across the room where the Eagles were eating, and they would page them, they would wave to them and smile and make a contact. But the ones who didn't remember the names had been to the games, so they would page them on the hotel system by their number.
Okay, so following the Eagles, arguably the most important person in Larry Doby's baseball life was Bill Veeck, owner of the Cleveland Indians, who signed him into the major leagues. Is that something you agree with?
Oh, absolutely. Bill Veeck is one of the finest human beings I ever met in my life. And his son, Mike, who was a contemporary of Larry Doby Jr., they hung out together when they were growing up. And Bill Veeck's father, his grandfather was a baseball writer and became the president of the Chicago Cubs. And one day he took Bill, this is before Larry was in the picture, took Bill into the counting room behind the box office where the money is always counted. And he said, "Bill, what color is that money?" And Veeck said, "It's green. It's green, right? What color are the people counting it?" And Bill said, "Well, they're all colors." He said, "Don't you ever forget that when you go into business." That was the guiding force. And Bill was unbelievable. In fact, Bill was head of fair housing on the Eastern Shore in Maryland. And in Cambridge, they had a big riot, burning buildings and whatever. They had nothing where Bill lived because he made sure that everybody got their fair shake. And for example, movies were segregated. And some movies they couldn't even go to. And so he had a barn on his property. He got a movie screen, and he would once a week put up first run theater movies and invite everybody in any color in the community to come and watch him. That was the father. And when Cambridge had its riot, Bill himself negotiated the truce between the rioters and the National Guard on his front porch with representatives of both there. This was an amazing guy.
Mhm.
So the day he picked up Larry, he said, I want you to remember one thing. It's just like that other league you played in. You're going to hit a round ball with a piece of wood. And what I've seen you do, you got nothing to be afraid of. But I know this, you're going to have slumps. I know that because I don't read stories. I read box scores. I'll know what's happening with you. And every time you're in a slump, I'm flying into wherever you are. We're going out, we're getting the biggest steak they sell in that time. And then we're going to go hear jazz. And the only things they fought about was Bill was Dixieland and Larry Doby was modern jazz. But he owed his career and his life to Vec.
Okay. So I'm going to throw three names at you. That are connected with Larry Doby and his Cleveland Indian days. Each one of these people played a consequential role in his career. And I'd like you to briefly explain how for each one. Tris Speaker, Joe Gordon, and Steve Gromick.
Okay. Tris Speaker was a great, great player long before I was born. And that's a long time ago. And he was an outfielder with the Red Sox and later came to play in Cleveland and even managed Cleveland. Well, the year before Doby was signed, Vec signed him not as a coach or anything. He signed him to be a goodwill ambassador to make speeches for the Indians. The following year, after Doby's first year, which was a disaster, he said, okay, forget the speeches. You're the best outfielder I can find anywhere. You're going to make an outfielder out of Larry Doby. Well, what makes it so interesting is he was from Humboldt, Texas. And as a young man, he was a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And that was, and Larry Doby he had strong feelings growing up in the South and whatever else, and being snubbed by his own team by a number of guys. The irony is they became great friends because they began to discuss their background. And Tris Speaker got so involved in learning about the Black community, and Larry got so involved in learning about how he, a Klan member, could change his feelings. They became the closest of friends, and Speaker did an unbelievable job. But the test would be when he had to play in the game. I mean, he just, you'd think he was playing a position for years.
Right.
And the
How
third
about
one was, what about Gromick? You want to hear about him?
Joe Gordon and Steve Gromick?
Okay. The day he reported, and very few people shook his hand. The first one was, hi, my name is Joe Gordon, hearty handshake. They're in Chicago. Larry doesn't have a locker yet. And you know from what I said earlier that most of the guys wouldn't shake his hand. It was bad. So he goes he didn't have a locker yet because they were in Chicago. He goes into the men's room, puts his uniform and looks at him and he says, well, screw them. I'm here, I'm playing. And he walks through the locker room, which is empty now because they're on the field. He walks up the tunnel. And as you get to the top step of the dugout, when you get to the dugout, suddenly there's light, there's the sky. He sees it and he hears a familiar song, familiar sound. And it's balls hitting baseball gloves. They're warming up. The 1947 Cleveland Indians are warming up, and nobody will throw him the ball. And then he feels somebody elbows him in his ribs. He turns, fists up already, because he's ready to fight. And it's Joe Gordon who's laughing. And Joe Gordon, the first guy to shake his hand, says, hey, rookie, do you want to stand up here and pose and profile in that brand new uniform? Or you want to get out of the field and warm up? They warmed up together. And as long as both of them were members of the Cleveland Indians for like 8, 9 years, they warmed up before every single game. They wouldn't throw the ball to anybody else, and they left them alone.
Right.
When he got
Jerry, could you move on to Steve Gromick, please?
Sure. 1948 World Series. Larry Doby went from a 157 hitter where they wouldn't put him up to bat. He was a pinch runner, and he only got up to bat about 15, 16 times. He hits 318. And he is a guy that the driving force on this team. Now they're in the World Series against the Boston Red Sox. I'm sorry, the Boston Braves. Shane, or was it Spahn and Shane and Pray for Rain? That was their pitching staff. Larry mutilated that pitching staff. And I've won a lot of money in a lot of bars by asking the question, who knows who hit the first, what black man hit the first World Series home run? And that was Larry Doby, not Jackie Robinson. Now, Gromek pitched the fifth game, went all the way. And he was like the fourth pitcher on the staff. And everybody was excited. That's the game in which Larry hit the home run that won it. Now, in the turmoil in the dressing room, remember, they had not been in the World Series for 28 years. Now, all of a sudden, the photographer from the local paper says, hey, bring Doby over here. You two guys pose. Gromek was so ecstatic. Doby was up. They were both on cloud nine. They put their arms around each other. Larry hugged him. That picture went on the front page of many Southern newspapers where you never saw a black guy and a white guy hugging. When it came back, in times of trouble after that, the picture was in Larry's mind. That's what carried him. Conversely, when Gromek got home to the northern peninsula of Michigan, he went to see a guy he had played ball with for years who had a bar. He walked into the bar and the guy walked right past him. And he said to him, what's wrong with him? The guy said, the picture. He walked over and said, something bothering you? He said, yeah, you could have shaken he didn't say Negro, believe me. You could have shaken his hand. You didn't have to go kiss the guy or hug the guy. Larry, as he walked out, Gromek lived in the same town, never spoke to that guy the rest of his life.
And
And
Jerry,
by the way, I got to tell you one thing you got to tell you. It's on the back of the
yes,
Congressional Citizens Medal that was awarded to Larry Doby.
that's what I was going to ask you. Doby's greatest disappointment as a player had to have been the Indians' flop in the 1954 World Series when they were swept by the New York Giants after an incredible regular season. Tell us how that lingered with Larry Doby.
Oh, it bothered him tremendously. See, in fact, he felt about, he was a fierce competitor. He never quit ever in his life, but he felt that they'd lost the World Series after the first game. Willie Mays makes what is called the catch. Everybody knows about that. Back to the plate. Amazing catch. Vic Wertz hits the ball. In the last inning, up come to pinch hit comes Dusty Rose for the Giants. The right field fence is only 257 feet away. He hits one into the first row. They lose the game. And Larry said it was very simple. That home run is an out in Cleveland, meaning Wertz's hit. And Rhodes hit, it's a pop fly ball in our stadium. And we couldn't believe this because they set a record for games won, which still stands. They had a pitching staff that was unbelievable. All they had to do was get a run and most games were over. Didn't happen in the World Series.
Okay, so among those you cite who weren't pluses in Larry Doby's life, can you speak a little bit about his manager in Cleveland, Lou Boudreau, and also the pitching legend Satchel Paige, his teammate?
Sure. Well, Boudreau didn't like him, and there's a lot of feelings about that story. I think Boudreau just hated him, and really. So he wouldn't play him. When Larry, years later, and we talked about this, I said to Larry, is it possible, I'm just asking, that maybe there was not enough guys interested in playing with a black man on that team, that's why he snubbed them all season? And Larry said to me, Jerry, that's a very intellectual theory as usual from you, but you're still full of crap. That ain't what happened. And that's the way it was. He overcame everything. And Boudreau, he played for managers after Boudreau left. So once Boudreau left, that was the end of that. Two guys, when it came time to shake hands, faced the wall. One of them was a first baseman named Eddie Robinson, who had a good career with Baltimore later on. And they didn't know what to do with him. So Bulldog said, okay, second game of the doubleheader, you're playing first base. He said, Skip, I didn't play much, but you want to play or not? He said, yeah, I want to play. He went to the first baseman, who turned his back to the wall, Robinson, and said, I'm sorry, but can I borrow your glove? And Robinson said, no, or the scatological pejoratives, he's going to put his hand in my mouth. And he had to play that game. They borrowed a glove from the White Sox, and he played that game with a borrowed glove, and they won.
So now let's look at the elephant in the room, the racism that Larry Doby faced in his life, both on the field and off. Your book does a terrific job of explaining to the reader from an historical viewpoint how and why it took Major League Baseball so long to integrate. But it also explores the racism that Doby faced at spring training sites, in the Patterson housing market, and also at the ball stadiums across America, much of America, in his playing days. This could be a tall task, but could you tell us why segments of the American population were so opposed to a Black man earning a living playing professional baseball, and how that antagonism was corrosive enough to extend beyond the ball field?
In St. Louis, there was a guy, I don't know whether the Browns hired him, they were the American League team, or whether he just came on his own. He stood on the overlook in the first row, overlooking the batting circle. And every time Larry got in the batting circle, it was things like nigger, nigger, nigger. And Larry said, that didn't bother me. I heard it already half a season. But one day he said, he's the uppity one. He thinks he is. His wife, Helen, is more uppity. She spells her name Helyn, but there's nothing uppity about what she did for me in my hotel room last night. That's all Larry had to hear. Up, one leg over the railing. He's going to end this forever and kill this guy if he has to. They were high school sweethearts. I mean, he never dated any other girl. And suddenly he's got one leg over the railing. He's flying backwards. On top of him is a bench coach / pitching coach named Bill McKechnie, later a Hall of Famer as a manager. He says, Dobes, don't move. You go up in those stands, you'll never play another baseball game. But more than that, this league is worse than the other league. This league doesn't want you. They don't like your color. They hate you. And if you step into those stands again, we won't get another Black player for 10 years. And as Doby told me, that was the first time he saved my career. The second time was the end of the season. Everybody knew he was not popular with the manager. They're packing up to go home and they're cleaning out the lockers. And McKechnie walks over and says, come here, step out in the hall. I want to talk to you. He says, first of all, understand this. You haven't made this team. Now, I've seen you swing. I mean, I've been around long enough to know you're going to be a great power hitter, but they're not going to give you a chance. Where are they going to play you? The manager's a second baseman. Joe Gordon, a 13 times All-Star. The manager's a shortstop. Joe Gordon is a second baseman. There's no place to put you. We have a lousy outfield. Go home. I can't tell you how. Learn to play the outfield. Come back. You'll make this team, and you will be a hero. Before you're done, you're going to be a superstar. So he goes home that summer. He's in the snow at Patterson East Side High School, trying to catch fungos from high school kids that he's helping him out there hitting the balls, and he's running through the snow to catch them. And he goes to the Patterson Public Library, and from that he takes out a book called How I Play Right Field for the New York Yankees by Tommy Henrich. And using it as a textbook far into the night, that was his outfield experience when he came in. But Veck, again, already had hired, the guy from Texas to be his mentor. And he just played the outfield like he was born to play. In fact, the catch that Mays made in the World Series, that same year, the end of the year, Larry made a better catch, jumping up above the stands, bringing the ball down, falling through the awning on top of the bullpen, hitting the ground, and holding the ball up to show he caught it. And the next day, Dizzy Dean, who was used to do the game of the day on the networks, said, I don't know this fella Doby, but I'll tell you this, that pitcher better give him a month's salary because I ain't never seen a catch like that.
Unbelievable. Jerry, your book is pretty clear that these racist attitudes that Larry Doby faced, at least in part, were fostered by sports writers. Is that correct?
Well, they didn't need any help. I mean, you know, you saw what happened in St. Louis. And I'll tell you, well, no, it hurt. It hurt very much. It hurt what the other players thought. They all read. They all want to know, and if it's not their name, they'll be critical. It was tough, these two guys. But before I talk about them, I want to tell you, he went to Washington and it was segregated, and the blacks all sat in left center field, left right field. And he tried so hard. He said, to hit a home run where they were, I really tried. But every time I hit a home run, it didn't matter where it went. You knew they were there. And some of them were in a ballpark, Major League ballpark for the first time. And some of them couldn't afford it anyway. They came to see me. And those home runs were my reciprocal gifts. Yeah, it was tough with the writers. One writer, they said he saw everything in terms of race, that he let the team down. They said the year they lost he had bad legs that year. Really, he hired the track star Harrison Dillard to come to his home and try to strengthen his legs. And he didn't hit well. He didn't drive in a lot of runs that year. And the sports editor of the Cleveland paper did a piece in Sport Magazine called "Is Larry Doby a Bust?" They attacked him. They attacked his family, and they said they said race really was not his problem. But a lot of people made it his problem.
Jerry, there's a story you tell in your book that seems uncharacteristic of Larry Doby from the rest of the book, and that's the time that he opened this bar on Market Street in Newark, which he called Larry Doby's Centerfield Lounge, that he used his children's college fund to buy. It flopped. He left one year to play in Japan, left his wife to run the bar. He lost $40,000. It doesn't seem consistent with the man for some reason. Am I wrong there?
You have to know the man. The bar was right down the block from the Grand Hotel. So he had a real reputation in that neighborhood. And he was positive there'd be a spillover into his bar. Helen said, don't do it. And Junior told me it was the only time it got so loud that he heard them fighting. And when he went and did it, she worked at a bar, and when it went under, she never once said to him, I told you so. And there aren't many wives who could have done that.
So all of this brings us to that snowy night in 1976, as you described it, when Larry Doby comes knocking on your door, when your families are both living in Montclair, and you have no idea why. Obviously he knows who you are, and you know who he is from, the sports world. But that visit was the genesis for this book, correct?
More important than that, it's a genesis for a 35-year friendship. Larry Doby knocks on my door. There's a blizzard going on. I insist we had bigger snowfalls in those days. At least it seems like that when you're younger. And I'm saying, I open the door and he's there, and it's snowing on him. And he looks at me, and I'm thinking, what the hell? I said, well, how you doing, Larry? And he said, I'm doing fine. He looks at me and he says, what do you drink? Well, when somebody said that to me in those days, I wouldn't lie. I said, if it's wet, I'm drinking it. He said, I'll be here 7 o'clock tonight with a bottle. Then he walks, I see his back disappearing into the snowflakes. Why in the hell did he come to my house? The Indians weren't that good most of the time. So if I saw him at the ballpark, it would be because I went up to interview a Yankee player, or there was a reason, some reason, but not him. He'd see me and say, hi, Jerry. I'd say, hi, Larry. That was our relationship. What the hell is he coming to my house for? 7 p.m. He walks into my house with a bottle, puts it down on the kitchen table. We sit down. We don't get out of our chairs until 10 a.m. and the sun is high in the sky. And he begins to tell me so much of the things he had kept inside him all that year. And I was fascinated. For me, it was an education. For him, it was a catharsis. And that was the start of our friendship. And boy, I'll tell you, I am so grateful for that day because I learned so much from him, and so much. I did one of the eulogies at his funeral. It was hard, and I didn't write it or anything. I got up and I said, I come from a typical American family, prototype, father, mother, daughter, son. And they're all looking at each other saying, what's he going to do? And I said, all my life, I wanted a brother. And that man filled that role for me for 35 years.
And Jerry, let me interject something here, because that visit that night also set you on the pathway where you would be in attendance at Doby's induction into the Baseball Hall of Fame in Cooperstown, New York.
Oh, yeah.
Where you were able to walk through the Hall of Fame's museum alone with him that night before the ceremony, after the place had closed, where the next day you were sitting in the audience where you said Larry Doby delivered your quote, the greatest 6-minute speech you'd ever heard, and where you were also able to enlist him in joining your charitable causes.
Well, enlisting was easy. He wanted to come. But as far as the Hall of Fame, that afternoon, we're sitting there and he said, the speech, I'm having a little trouble with my speech. I said, Larry, you're on your own with the speech. Just speak from your heart. Tell them what you think. He told me a story I had never heard. And not many people in America have ever heard it until today. He said he was somewhere in the South, spring training, and they were throwing beer cans at him. And he had to walk out. He just left the game. After it was over, he's walking out, and he meets a tall black man in a well-tailored suit. He says, Mr. Doby, can I speak to you? He said, I'll speak to anybody. He's not going to throw a beer bottle at me. And he said, well, listen, my wife, I'm the only black doctor in this town. My wife feels very strongly you should not be in a segregated boarding house. You always end your exhibition tour in my town. Come here, starting now, tonight. Live with us. My wife will make anything. She's a great cook. And he's telling me, I never heard the story. And he's saying, they treated me like family for about 2 or 3 years, and then we lost track of each other. About a few years after that, I'm reading about a lunch counter sit-in where a doctor gets shot to death. And it's the doctor. I said, Larry, you got to tell that story at the speech. Larry said, I don't think it's the right time. I said, Larry, you owe that guy. He said, I may owe him, but I'm not doing it. And that speech he made was incredible. He talked about the picture with Gromek and him. And he said, America needed that picture. And I am so proud that I became half of that picture. And as a result of that, then he finished up by saying, a lot of people say we're not moving fast enough, but I got to say something. Look at America. Take a good look at America. And I swear, I lived it, so I know how bad it was in the beginning. But I'm telling you, baseball has come so much further than America, and it's time for this whole country to look inward.
Okay. So, Jerry, my final question is this. You call Larry Doby in your book, this is a quote, baseball's invisible hero. And you also say you believe the gulf between Jackie Robin's legacy and Larry Doby's legacy has unfairly widened over the years. Why do you think that is? And what do you think can be done to stop or reverse the growth of that gap? And does it really matter in an age where pro football and pro basketball are far and away the most dominant sports in America, and where minority participation in baseball in America doesn't seem to be what it once was.
Well, just to go to the end of your question, that's because those guys are making better money as tight ends and wide receivers and ball carriers. Baseball's fallout has to do with the change in the cities, and it has to do with the time that basketball, the cheapest recreation thing any city can do is put up hoops. You don't even have to put up the nets. And these kids learn on those courts, those cement courts, and they're just, their mind is geared to in another direction. But as far as what was the beginning of the question?
Yeah, the gulf between Jackie Robin's legacy and Larry Doby's legacy.
They only had three things in common, three important things, so they wouldn't have been chosen. One, they had both played both with and against white boys. Two, they had both gone to college. Three, they were both honorably discharged veterans. After that, they were totally different people. Larry's whole, when you read about Camden and the women that he lived with, his mother had him living with because she was a domestic and couldn't take him into the house she worked at, you realize he was raised by very strong Black women. And their ethics, it's a disappearing thing in America today. They were the church-going ethics. And it made him, he didn't want to complain. It made him keep everything inside. And that, not Jackie, Jackie had something to say, he said it. And in his later years, if he had something to say, Doby, he would say it too. But the thing was that Jackie had a locker room. He had a locker room where they were told, you don't want to play with him, I'll trade you. He had a locker room in the town that he lived in. He lived in Brooklyn. He moved to Brooklyn with Rachel. The kids grew up in. So half of his baseball career during the tough days was spent at home. Larry did not have a friendly locker room. And I will say this, Satchel Paige, the second Black, did not join the Indians until after spring training, Larry's second year. So for those 2 years, he was on the road by himself, sitting in black boarding houses, cake of ice on the table, a little tiny fan blowing on the ice, try to get some relief. Taxi cabs wouldn't pick him up. Sometimes he'd have to walk in Washington. The white cab drivers would not pick him up. In spring training, when they traveled through the South, nobody would pick him up. He was, and as he once said, I've been alone most of my life, which is true because his father died when he was 6, and he stayed with his grandmother in South Carolina. He came north, and his mother couldn't live with him, so he had friends. He lived with her friends. He was alone most of his life, and he was not a complainer. He wanted to do things to do them. Tris Speaker, the ex-Klan guy who taught him to play the outfield, said he never saw a prospect who wanted more to learn because he didn't know a damn thing about playing the outfield. He was just so full of wanting to succeed, but something else about him, which has to do with pride. Junior would ask him all the time, his son, tell me about the days, how bad was it? He said, that's old history. You want to know how bad it was? Go Google it. But if you asked him about his high school football career, he talked for an hour and a half. That's the way he was. He didn't want, right. He wouldn't expose Junior to what happened to him until Junior was much, much older.
Right. So I just want to throw in an aside here before we go to questions, and that is a little known fact that Jackie Robinson hosted a TV program from the studio in Symphony Hall in Newark for a while. And I have to believe that they might be available somewhere, to watch. I think that would be very interesting to see that show.
I have no idea. I didn't know it existed.
Yeah, well, there were a lot of great shows that were broadcast out of the TV station studio in the bowels of Symphony Hall. I mean, Pete Seeger had a show. Mike Wallace had a show. a bunch of others. But anyhow, thank you, Jerry. Good luck with the book. And now let's go to some audience questions.
All right, thank you, Jerry, and thank you, Guy. That was a terrific talk. Yeah, you mentioned Symphony Hall, the studio at Symphony Hall. Channel 13, WAAM, was based at Symphony Hall for many years when it was a commercial station before it became public television. I have a question of my own to start off
Good.
with. Jerry, I was really struck by that story you told about the time that Doby was prevented from jumping into the stands after a jeering fan, and he was told by the coach who stopped him. He said, if you do this, the American League is not going to hire another black player for another 10 years. And it just seems like a big responsibility that that they were giving a single man to have. And I've heard stories about Jackie Robinson he was chosen by Branch Rickey to break the color barrier because he could stand up to the pressure and everything. I mean, but I think you said at one point that the American League was worse than the National League
By
when it came
far,
to
by
this.
far.
Yeah, why was that?
Because they were more bigoted. I mean, that's as simple
Yeah,
as
but
that.
why? I mean, that seems I
Well, they
don't
were the
understand why.
people. Look, I'll tell you an example. Calvin Griffith is the son of the guy who owned the original Washington Senators.
Clark Griffith.
He moved the team to Minneapolis. And when he arrived in town, he said, I'm going to tell you why I moved the Senators here. You only have 15,000 Negroes in this town. Now that should tell you something right there. The best repartee I ever heard was a guy named Sam Lacey, a brilliant guy who was the sports editor for the Afro-American newspaper chain. He was sitting in Griffith's office one day and he said, because he lived in the neighborhood and Griffith liked him, he said, Mr. Griffith, I really think it's time you had a black player. And Griffith said, I can't do that, and you're going to be surprised when I tell you why. Look at the number. Your leagues will fold. Look at the number of blacks I will put out of work. And he said, Mr. Lincoln put a lot more out of work, and it didn't bother him.
Okay. So another question we have is Mr. Doby, this is from Robert Qualls. Mr. Doby was hugely popular in Detroit during the late 40s and early 50s.
Yeah.
He told me once that he had gotten traded to the Tigers in the late 50s. What did he share with you about his experiences in Detroit?
There weren't any because he didn't play very long.
Oh.
He played very little there. He he was a superstar by then. He was an 8-9-time All-Star. So there's nothing came out of Detroit except his exit because he became a coach and then a manager.
Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. All right. So the book really focuses on his time with the Indians. Then is that true? Or is it just general?
No, the White Sox, where he managed, and the Minnesota Twins, where he was a coach with enormous success before he managed.
Ah, okay. So from Dale Colston, great talk, gentlemen. Where does Larry Doby rank in the best ever? Top 10?
No, as a player, no.
No?
No, but I say, I carried on a campaign. We didn't talk about this. I tried to get him in the Hall of Fame. The writers wouldn't put him in the Hall of Fame because they're obsessed with statistics. And I said to a couple of good writers from big papers, I said, I don't know what's wrong with you guys. Well, the numbers my ass. Let me tell you something. What do you think Babe Ruth's numbers would have been if he got death threats every night and his family was getting him to? What do you think his numbers would have been under those circumstances? And so anyway, they wouldn't put him in. Finally, the Veterans Committee, right? They got control. And they didn't put him in. And I was fed up. So I said, Larry said to me, I don't want you writing anymore about me being in the Hall of Fame. I'm not going to get in. And you're not helping yourself by doing that. So, well, I'm going to do it one more time. He got in that year. I don't think it was because of me, but he got in. I wrote the nastiest column I could think of. I said, why am I not surprised the Veterans Committee are dragging their feet on this? Because some of you guys didn't want him to play baseball in the first place. And then I mailed it to every single committee member. I got one answer. I'm going to quote it to you, and I'm sorry about the language, but I'm going to quote it to you. It said, "Dear asshole, Larry Doby belongs in the Hall of Fame. Monty Irvin, um, um, Yogi Berra, and I are on the Veterans Committee. We have been voting for him over and over again. So get your fat ass off the couch and get us some votes we need." And it was signed by Ted Williams,
Oh, wow.
which came as no surprise to me. Not because, I don't mean the dear asshole part, but I mean when Larry first came in the league. In the old days, he used to leave their gloves in the outfield. Remember, they'd drop them in the outfield and they'd come in. And on the way, they'd bend over, pick up, go out to play the outfield. He's bending over to pick up his glove, the first trip into Boston, and he gets swatted in the ass. He looks up, and it's Williams, and he says, "Keep your head up, rookie. You're going to be one of the great ones." So Williams spotted it in him all along. Larry was, yeah, but people don't understand the history. I put it straight. Meeting room O was a conference room at the old Roosevelt Hotel, which is now gone. And baseball used to have its meetings there. And they held a meeting and they invited 3 black distinguished people and Paul Robeson, who was then playing on Broadway in a play called The Emperor Jones, to make their case why blacks should be in. But it was a farce. So before Robeson could say a word, he said, "Now let me get this straight. There's something here I don't understand. You're claiming that these owners, they're all in the room. You're claiming these men here, these fine men here, don't have the courage if they have a boycott of some type to say so. It's not a written rule. It's not an unwritten rule. And I would never enforce such a rule. Not much." So he appointed a committee to study it. And he made Robeson the head of the committee, which never met. And that went on until finally there was a parade down 6th Avenue, stage managed by the Daily Worker, the communist newspaper, and Effa Manley, the general manager of the Eagles, they had this parade for like 26 blocks. The war was on. It was near the end, but it was on. And the theme was, if they can field bullets, they can field ground balls. And it had something to do with it.
Okay. So Philip White is asking, how can I get a signed copy of Larry Doby in black and white? Thank you, Jerry Eisenberg. How does he get a signed copy?
Well, you don't have to thank me for that. I thank you for buying the book. But I'll tell you this. If you will send, let me get this right. I don't want to give out my phone number or anything, but if you would send an email to me, I will send you, and once you get the book, I will send you an oblong piece of paper. It's got an ornate scroll around it. It's called a book plate. I will dedicate the book to you. You peel it off a little loosely attached paper, slap it in the inside cover, you got an autographed book. So I guess I'll have to give you my email.
That's J. Eisenberg at starledger.com. Is that right?
You got that perfect.
Yeah.
I don't. Now I'm going to call you when anybody wants my email.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's it. Send it to me. Say I have the book, and give me your name. I'm not going to write the Declaration of Independence in that square, but I will dedicate the book to you.
Okay, that's good. So this is Kathy Heim says, not a question, but just thanks so much for this interview. It's fascinating listening to Jerry Eisenberg, who I've read for years. I hope he gets to do many more long-form interviews about this. Bravo to all. So
you're the one who reads my column. I knew there's one out there. Kathy, I love you. It's you listened to it. You had a harder time than I had saying it.
Okay. So those are our questions and comments for tonight. And unless somebody else has something else, please type it in the chat box. But other than that, this has been a terrific talk. And thank you very much to both Jerry and Guy. Good luck with the book, Jerry. It's great that it's sold out already on Amazon, but it's you said that they're shipping more to them, so you'll be able to buy some more
You'll be
soon.
able to get the book
Yeah.
by the 27th of the month.
Okay. Is it being sold in any brick and mortar stores?
What's Barnes and Noble has it.
Barnes and Noble has it too. Okay. All right. That's
I
good.
find the other people are selling more books, I think.
Yeah. Okay. So thank you for both of you. Recording of this interview will be available later on the library's YouTube page. Good night, everyone. Be safe.
Thank you, Tom.